The race is on, and launch season reached its conclusion with Aston Martin and McLaren holding online launches and Cadillac revealing its livery in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl. So what did Adrian Newey reveal about his latest creation, and is there really anything left to learn from these late launches? I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to tell all is Jon Noble. Well, Jon, you're in Bahrain right now. You had a quick day trip to Saudi Arabia for the Aston Martin launch. I was hoping to be able to know a little bit more about it, but because of the delay, we're recording kind of as it's going out as live as the stream. So I've kind of got it on in the background, but not really been able to watch it. So because it was recorded earlier in the day, you've already lived through it. So what was the big message you took from it?
The message, it was a kind of a weird launch, really, because this is Adrian Newey's first Aston Martin car. He's team principal. So one of the big attractions of going to the launch was to speak to Adrian, get his feedback, get some understanding of the car. You know, amazing looking car, lots of interesting tech aspects of it. But Newey didn't speak to us. He was late. They said he claimed he was in some meetings. Then he did his stage stuff and then instantly rushed off. So we didn't get to speak to Adrian. So all we got from him, small snapshots on stage. So it's mainly left to Fernando, Alonso and Lance Stroll to give us. And I think there was no definite hint of any kind of we're in competitive trouble or we're going to be gunning for race wins from the off. Everything was very measured, very considered. But Fernando's that wily old fox, so you can read between the lines of everything he's saying. And there were quite a few references to him about playing the long game, that this isn't how we start the season in Australia. This isn't, if we find some troubles with the car in Bahrain, if we start slowly in Australia, if things aren't good in the first race, 3 races, 4 races, 5 races, that's not what matters. What matters is how you chart your development out and how you finish the season. And he talked about the second half of the season being more important than the first. Read between all the lines of that, and that's someone saying we're expecting to have quite a challenging start to the year, I think.
So a bit of managing expectations, even though they obviously still believe they're on the right track. So it just adds to that feeling that maybe 2026 is that little bit too early for this team?
I think so. I think there's a lot of hype around. You've got, Fernando Alonso still at the top of his game. Adrian Newey, we know, is a brilliant designer. You've got Honda, who have won lots of world championships in the turbo hybrid era. So you see all those elements come together around an Aston Martin team that's now got its wind tunnel up and running, simulators up and running, the factory's in business. So all the elements are there. But I think there's one thing having all the elements in place. It's the other thing that actually manifesting itself into hard results on track. And there was one very interesting comment from Adrian Newey on stage. He was asked about the Aston Martin campus and how is it now it's up and running. And he said, it's the best in the business. Everything is class leading now, number one in facilities. He says, but there's a secondary element. And the secondary element for a team is personnel and the people who build it. And he says, we're making great strides there, which to me, another one of those kind of reading what he means, is that perhaps the level of quality of personnel when he arrived wasn't where he demanded they should be or what was needed to be up there, but it's getting there slowly. But this is a thing that F1 gardening leave time takes time to do things, getting personnel on board, it takes time to impact. Even when they come on board, it takes time for their expertise to filter through the system. So I still think this is a project that is not yet ready to deliver from the off, but all those things, you just sense all the elements are lining up. It's just a question of when.
Yeah, and of course, Newey himself didn't start until, March last year. He said they were about 4 months late in terms of putting the car in the wind tunnel last April. So, yeah, on all fronts, maybe just that little bit too early. And although anyone who was expecting or hoping that Aston Martin, with everything they've spent, everybody they've brought on board with Newey, with Aramco, with Honda, it ticks all the boxes on paper, doesn't it? But I think those who are expecting them to hit the front this year shouldn't write it off in perpetuity, because these are like big oil tankers, aren't they? These Formula One teams, they're very, very quick at doing certain things, but actually building it up, ramping it up is a pretty slow process. So it does sound like they're going in the right direction. And when you get Newey, you will get someone who's going to kick every corner of the factory he thinks is relevant and find things he wants to improve. you bring in Adrian Newey so he can say, actually, I don't think we're quite there in terms of these personnel, or as he did last year when he talked publicly about the simulator, the driver and loop simulator being not quite where it needs to be. That's why you have Adrian Newey, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's also an element, a realistic element too, that we're into a new rule set, and this is something Adrian mentioned on stage, and no one knows what the right concept is for this rule set yet. So everyone's got their own ideas about, the airflow regime of the car, what the rate should be, what the air should be doing over the side pod, how it should feed into the diffuser, what should be doing with your suspension, where should your suspension be? And there will be multiple ideas as we start this rules era. One of those ideas, somewhere on the grid, will be the correct one. And just as happened in 2022, when the start of the rules era, multiple solutions for side pods. You had zero pods, you had in-wash side pods, you had down-wash side pods, you had the first inklings of those little kind of water slides. And in the end, it steadily evolved into a concept that everyone accepted and thought, right, this is the right approach. And everyone charges down that route. Adrian's quite clear on this car that this isn't a car that's got, one genius idea or two genius ideas. It's an holistic approach to a car based on a philosophy that he said when he started gardening leave from Red Bull. Basically was sat there just thinking, right, what are these rules set trying to achieve? What can I do with a car designed to deliver the maximum performance from this rule set? So what should the philosophy of my design be? He thought on it, jotted some ideas down, arrived at Aston Martin last March, went to the design and engineering team. So this is the philosophy I believe we should pursue. Do you agree to it? They said yes, and that's the route they've gone down. Doesn't necessarily mean it is the right philosophy of this rule set. It could mean they need to get out of it and copy someone else who's done a better job. But he is the sort of person who is not foolish enough to say, my philosophy is the right one, we're sticking to it, whatever. He is the exact person who will say, their solution is best, or our solution is best. This is what we're doing, because all that matters is winning.
Yeah, and that's the same mindset that actually means he's more likely to hit on the right solution, because not only, as I always say, is he extremely good at looking at a set of regs and working out kind of roughly where you need to be with the compromises, where are the big areas of performance that you need to focus on, perhaps over other areas where there's less to be gained. But he's also good at taking inputs from outside. He's not dogmatic about it. So yeah, that's exactly what they've got in Newey. Now, we've seen the car, we know it's pushing the limits in quite a few areas, so it's impressive. And because it's a Newey car, you give it the benefit of the doubt, don't you? You think, well, if Newey's come up with that, chances are that's going in the right direction. But did you get anything from the drivers, particularly Fernando Alonso, who obviously got a number of laps in the car on the final day of the test, about the potential of the car, or were they just too limited in running and too restricted in what they could do to draw any conclusions?
Yeah, well, Edd Straw laughed when I said, did you get any clue about the car from your limited running you did on that Thursday? And he said, well, I did a 1 minute 45 lap and did about 2 laps full, and then that was the end of that. So he's got absolutely zero experience properly with this car. And even Fernando, he said they were very limited. They were having to do this constant speed running down the straight. It was something I wanted to ask Adrian Newey, actually. Why were you doing that? What were the reasons? But obviously he didn't speak to us, so that'll have a question I have to save for another day. So he says that's given them so they don't know where they stand on energy management, because how you're running down the straight has a huge impact, both in terms of your energy deployment and energy harvesting. And then that then impacts how you're cornering and what you're doing the rest of the lap. So from Fernando's perspective, they haven't really got anything at the moment. They don't understand strengths. They don't understand weaknesses. They don't understand where they stack up. All they've got is some initial feedback on seating position, pedal position, a bit of cooling, bit of comfort for the drivers, a few little vibrations here and there. So this is why this week in Bahrain is absolutely critical.
Well, I'll be hoping that it runs a bit more smoothly than their launch stream has, because not only was it late, but it seemed to break off while Alonso and Stroll were talking as well. So that's not been progressing particularly effectively. But I think in the final reckoning, it's patience with Aston Martin, isn't it? Yes, they should be a little bit further along, but with the changes they've had with Newey late, I think we do have to take on board what they've said and then start to look at the rate of progress over the year and start thinking about, well, if they're going to be a championship winning force, we're now thinking of 27 and beyond, which sounds a little bit like constantly deferring it, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I think that is a realistic thing. I mean, they never talked about fighting for a championship from the off in 26. They're always about this long-term ambition. But you always think that that marriage of Newey, Alonso, Honda, the facilities at Silverstone should be delivering quick success, but it doesn't happen in Formula One. There is a reality to Formula One that the margins of improvements are so small, the degree of detail you need to go in is so intricate to make progress. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it could happen. It's not impossible. They start the season slowly in Australia. There's a rejig of Honda engines for race 7 or 8. Then Adrian Newey brings in a major development for the start of the European season. That's the missing 3-4 temps and shifts them forward. It's not impossible. But I think we can't judge. I think it's fair for what Fernando said, that we cannot judge Aston Martin based on how it performs in Australia. So if it's uncompetitive there, I don't think you can say this project's a failure. But if we get to the end of the season and it's still struggling and limping and hasn't made progress and there is no direction forwards, then you're going to have to start asking questions about where is all this brilliance? What was it, all this brilliance and investment at Silverstone producing?
Well, more on Aston Martin in a moment. But just to remind everybody, we have got a 7-day free trial running for the Race Members Club. Loads of bonus content there. We call it your F1 2026 Paddock Pass. You get to travel with me, John, and the rest of the team around the world. Lots of extra content behind the scenes, our popular in-car insights, podcasts, etc. And John, have you found any mountains to go up where you are today, or any benches to do extra content around? Because that's what we were mainly doing at the Barcelona test.
Yeah, I did see a hill from, obviously Bahrain's quite flat. We went over the bridge to Saudi Arabia, and then there's the town called Ithra, which is only about half an hour from going across the bridge. I did notice from our viewpoint up in the media, we had a little media centre area, looked out over the landscape, and there were 2 hills. I thought they'll be perfect if there was a F1 test taking place, or I could even follow Adrian Newey, work out where he was going, and maybe get to speak to him.
That would have been a good bit of extra content. We do loads of additional stuff, and we're certainly going to do loads in the upcoming test. Obviously, we'll all be out there for the first Bahrain test later this week, so we'll see the cars up close, and we always enjoy doing that extra content. So if you want to have a bit of a look behind the curtain, as it were, see what you do get from the Race Members Club, and it's a mix of the kind of in-depth coverage you expect from the race and also a bit more personal stuff plus the thriving community, then sign up for the 7-day free trial. Hit the link in the episode description, head to Patreon, search for the race or the Race Members Club, and you'll be able to find out all about it. Let's talk a little bit more about what Fernando Alonso had to say today, John, because obviously people are looking at drivers like him, the intelligent drivers, the adaptable ones. They're the ones who might be able to steal a march with the changing parameters of these cars and all of the energy management, all that kind of thing. But Alonso seemed to reject that notion, didn't he?
Yeah, we've had lots of drivers who've spoken to about this energy harvesting, energy deployment, how you do it, how you lift and coast, where you're looking to gain advantage, where you look to use your boost, where you use your overtake, where you plan your overtakes to not get pounced upon later on. It's all thrown up this kind of consensus that the smartest drivers, the clever drivers, are going to benefit an awful lot because in theory they can outsmart someone else who isn't as good as them. Now, Fernando, who you think is, A1 prime, to stand up and say, yeah, I'm the genius, I can sort this out, it's going to be amazing for me, actually said he thinks it's going to be almost minimal gain from the smart drivers over everyone else, primarily because he thinks all the engineers will very, very quickly agree on a plan for energy deployment and energy harvesting. So, areas of tracks will become nailed down. He also says that in terms of boost and overtake, that the kind of the ramp down rate of engine power, so the engine power doesn't just drop off a cliff, it comes down very gently, has to be pre-programmed, kind of defines where you use your boost. It's because there's a long window, so there's not actually much variation in terms of where you use it and what your ramp down rate is. So that's gone. Then he says even when you got overtake, it's such a tiny amount of extra power for such a small amount of time that actually it's not going to make much difference. So he thinks the potential was there, but he says it's been overregulated, that the drivers are a bit handcuffed now. They're locked down into a system where, there may be some variation in the first few races, but very quickly, everyone's going to do the same thing. Everyone's going to deploy at the same time. Everyone's going to harvest at the same time. And it won't lead to the variation that we hope for.
Yeah, this is an interesting bit of messaging, because one of the things I've been wondering with what the drivers have been saying is how many of them have been accentuating the positives, etc. And all drivers will naturally look for where they can get an advantage. But it's interesting, somebody like Alonso's been strong on that. And who knows whether expected limitations of the package he's got might play a part in that. But yeah, when Alonso speaks about that sort of stuff, he speaks from a position of knowledge, doesn't he, with the experience he's had in sports cars, IndyCar, that kind of thing, where he has had to run in categories where energy management, often in the form of fuel management, is important. But yeah, I'll be really, really interested to see when I get to Bahrain how they're driving these cars as well, and whether the drivers are boxed in also. So yeah, some concerning messaging, should we say, there from Fernando Alonso. Shall we talk about McLaren now, John? Now, I suspect you probably didn't see the McLaren launch. They did a stream from Bahrain, streaming only event. Obviously, you were in the Aston Martin one that was going on. That was actually being filmed in the afternoon at about the same time. I don't know about you, but it feels a little bit like the McLaren launch has happened multiple times, doesn't it, with all the stuff we've done?
Yeah, it's been a strange launch season just because some of these launches have clashed. So we've not been able to. Normally, they keep them all spread apart so you can follow them all individually. But Ferrari, I missed Ferrari because was it the same day as Alpine?
Yeah, we were swanning around on a cruise ship.
One of the Mercedes, yeah, swanning around on a cruise ship, drinking champagne and eating caviar. And then I think I missed Mercedes. Is it Mercedes we missed because we were travelling to sit on a cruise ship to drink champagne and eat caviar? And then I missed the McLaren event today because I was on my way to not speak to Adrian Newey. And but we had been you and I saw the car for the first time before the launch. So we had an event that wasn't a launch. So the non-launch, we saw the car, but I didn't actually see the launch to see the livery. But I actually did see the livery last week at another non-launch. That was when the drivers spoke. So I have seen the livery, just not the livery when it was officially made public, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's a strange one. So there were those two. There was also, we did an online press conference that I was in with Zach Brown that happened this morning, which we had to wait for the launch to happen. So it's happening across multiple things. So I must admit, I watched the launch stream, which, to their credit, it went off technically a lot better than the Aston Martin one. Didn't seem to get too interrupted. I think did see a cameraman caught on camera at one stage as well. So didn't go 100% smoothly, but it was pretty good. But it all felt like it was covering the same old ground. So it's actually really difficult because you try and put yourself in the position of, say, a fan who's watching that and work out what they get from it. And I actually find it really hard to tell because they had everyone there. They had Zach Brown, they had Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, they had Rob Marshall talking through the car. So all the things you'd expect. And Andrea Stella, of course, was there too. So you had all the big names talking, but talking about things we've heard quite a bit before. So it's just symptomatic of the weirdness of these launches that it's so back to front. It felt like a relic from January.
Yeah, but I think it's symptomatic of the error they all made of making the first test closed. Because if you'd had a normal first test, you'd have had all the launches either beforehand or on the morning of the test. So everything would have been revealed, everything would have been in public. But they've lived in this weird kind of limbo world where some of them have wanted to unveil park cars, some of them didn't want to unveil the full thing beforehand. Some of them were running in black test liveries, which was the original plan. So it's all been this kind of mishmash of compromises all the way through for a closed test that I didn't see achieved a single good thing for Formula One because all the information got out anyway, thanks to us being up a hill. And it didn't serve to educate, and it's just caused teams to get trapped in this world of we need to launch the car first with our test livery, then we're going to run in that livery, then we're going to have another launch that isn't our launch, but then we'll have a season launch with a press conference that's embargoed and tripped on top. So it's been very disjointed, I think. Only very few teams have done, this is the car, this is the launch, here's our drivers, here's the team people, bish, bash, bosh, job done.
Yeah, so it has made for a very strange and quite unsatisfactory in some ways launch season and first test. So McLaren was, one of the stragglers. Well, the very last one that went was Aston Martin, obviously. But yeah, McLaren, the highlight for me actually for McLaren was they decided to have a firework display on the start, on the straight in Bahrain, so they all went outside and enjoyed the fireworks that went on for some time. So I think there may have been a bit of forced enjoyment of the fireworks from people who might have been happier to go and do something else, but they were very spectacularly done. So that was the big finale of the launch. But I'd be interested to know what listeners and watchers thought of the McLaren one, because it felt a little bit just, as I said, out of date and already happened for me. But I don't see what else they can do. And obviously, they like launching in Bahrain because of the Mumtalakat ownership.
But you have to also remember the launches aren't just for the media and they're not just for fans. There's a lot of sponsors and partners involved. So they've also been quite heavily compromised by this weird test kind of forcing their hands to do stuff, because the sponsors want to see their logos, want to see the final livery, want to feel part of a launch, which you can't be if you're just revealing a test livery at the beginning. So the teams want an event. It's what Alpine did on the cruise ship. It's what Aston Martin did in Saudi Arabia. It's what McLaren did today. These are as much partner events and bringing all that on board as a celebration of the year as they are for media. So you've got all these conflicting reasons and justifications for doing stuff. But unfortunately, sometimes they aren't always aligned. And what works for one aspect doesn't work for another. I've heard some comments about Alpine, for example, that when we were there, I thought it was a great launch. Big statement event, spectacular. We got to see the car. We got to speak to drivers. We got to speak to Flavio for quite a while. We got to speak to David Sanchez, the tech people. So all the access we wanted. But for people watching at home on the YouTube stream, some of them said didn't like it at all. Didn't think it was there for fans. So I don't think you can please everybody. But I think the teams have found themselves quite, perhaps more compromised this year, trying to keep all these people happy than before.
Yeah, I don't envy them. Of course, the Alpine launch only had a show car, didn't it? It didn't have the real car, so that was one of the downsides. But it's been a very, very weird few weeks in that regard, and probably the launches haven't really satisfied anyone, which I suspect means they'll probably avoid this sort of thing again in the future. Well, John, let's talk about compression ratios. Now that controversy is still burbling on. Zak Brown actually talked about it today. He was not quite as feisty as Toto Wolff was when he talked about it, but his message was basically the same. It's, well, we're legal. There'll always be this politicking going on if you haven't got it. I did actually ask him, well, if there is a change to the rules, which is something that there's a push to try and do, and even talk could happen for Australia, that they take out that ambient temperature measurement line that's in the technical regulations. Is there a possibility that the Mercedes engine cars couldn't run? He said, well, I don't think we'll get to that. I'm not expecting there not to be Mercedes engine cars on the track, but it's a really interesting situation because, as you revealed in a story that was out at the end of last week, there is this push from the other manufacturers, including Red Bull now, who were kind of there with Mercedes originally, pushing to try and get something pushed through and talk of Australia. So what exactly is going on? How much of it is the threat of Australia to try and get them to accept something else down the line? Where are we at?
Yeah, it's an interesting political situation now, because originally it was Mercedes, obviously in the one side of the camp. Red Bull kind of had half a foot in their camp, because from what we understand, they knew what Mercedes was doing. They understood how their interpretation of the regulations were, and then were obviously looking to exploit it themselves. And then you had the three other manufacturers, so Ferrari, Honda, Audi, very unhappy about basically finding out quite late what the regulations were, how they'd been framed, realising they'd missed a trick, writing to the letter to the FIA, trying to push for change. But it seemed they were, three's not enough to do very much in get rules changed or do anything. But what we learned last week is that kind of Red Bull's been won across, that the Red Bull's fallen into line with the other three, which then means it's four manufacturers versus one, which is quite significant in the way the voting structure works, because from what we understand, to get a rule changed immediately for this season, it's not unanimous support. It's what's called a supermajority. So a slight change with the Concorde, which means 4 of the 5 manufacturers have to vote in favour. So we've got that now. So if these 4 manufacturers can vote in favour of compression ratios are measured hot, and this is how it should be done, then that's a big step forward. But key to getting the rule changed is what FIA and FOM say, because if FIA and FOM agree with those 4, then the rule's changed. either of them say no, then the supermajority can't happen. So it's where FOM and FIA now fall in terms of this decision. So if the four come forward with a rule proposal change pre-Melbourne and go for a vote, it's essentially FIA and FOM normally vote together. Very rarely they will dispute something. It's where their stance lies. And that's the big question mark at the moment. There was a video that FIA put out today, which we think was done before the recent power unit advisory committee meetings. But they say the message was adamant that they want this sorted before Melbourne. But didn't say what the sorted meant. So does sorted mean they get an answer and we agree a progress for mid-26 or 27? Or does sorted mean we're going to get things changed and it's in force for Melbourne? So it's where what the FIA's stance now is absolutely critical to where this goes. Because if the FIA agree with the four manufacturers, then Mercedes is powerless to stop it.
Although doubtless they'll have plenty of things that Mercedes can push back on in terms of what the FIA knew about the design, because obviously when things are being worked on, often there's consultation with the FIA, etc. And given, I mean, again, it depends on exactly what the proposal is and if something changes, exactly how it changes. I think if you're Mercedes, you'd be entitled to say, well, hang on a minute, that's changing an emphatic wording of the rules, because it's one thing to say actually this is illegal because it infringes this, etc., but absolutely taking something out of the rules and saying no, we're not doing it at ambient, we're doing it in different conditions, that starts to make me wonder if you might have legal recourse in that if you feel the governance has let you down, which is why I can't imagine there's any possibility it will change for Australia. Surely that threat of Australia is there to get Mercedes to accept something that comes in, say, earlier than 27 on a realistic timeline, because changing these engine designs is not the work of a moment.
No, I can't. I would be shocked if the FIA said we're measuring hot from Australia, just because you're into engines are homologated on March the 1st. They will have been designed around interpretations of the regulations. And if you're a manufacturer that's questioned and had things clarified and interpretations confirmed all the way through a rule set that's been in play now for 3 years, and then you come to 3 weeks before the first race and suddenly that decision's changed, it would be ludicrous if the FIA changed its mind at this stage for Melbourne. I think in the end it will be a compromise for 27. I don't know in which direction, but I'm sure there'll be some movement either to clarify what the rules are, open up to everybody, or we go hot from 27. So I can see that happening. But if you had a big change immediately, then I could just see a huge can of worms getting opened up, because you start challenging rear wing regulations, for example, that if rear wings are flexing at speed, then surely they're outside of the dimensions that are laid down in regulations. If a car's, tyres on a car become slightly wider when the car's cornering, does that then become a need for a clarification and a protest that tyre's too wide for the regulations, because when it's cornering at speed, it becomes slightly enlarged? So you're opening up a whole can of worms in terms of interpretation of a rule book, because the rules have always been measured in stationary, in the garage. That's how length is measured, it's how weight's measured. It's always been done that way. So to then suddenly change it and say, no, actually we're going to start measuring how things are on track. I'd like to see the FIA getting out on the track with a ruler to try to measure tyre whips and aerodynamic parts when the car's at speed.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, the real world is not always black and white, and measuring these things can be tricky. There are some interesting ideas around, and there does appear to be a direction that they can tighten up on this down the line. But yeah, I would have thought that it's a more medium-term thing than a short-term thing, but we'll know by the time we get to Melbourne. Let's quickly finish on Cadillac. John, did you watch the Super Bowl advert? 60 seconds that will have cost them many, many, many millions of dollars.
Yeah, I didn't get up live for it, partly because I was in my Bahrain hotel, seemed to be above the loudest nightclub in the world last night. So having finally got to bed at 2, I wasn't going to get up at 4 o'clock to watch the Super Bowl. But I saw the replay, or the kind of the actual advert itself on YouTube this morning.
Yeah, I did exactly the same. Although ideally, I'd probably watch the Super Bowl, but it's on at a very awkward time generally. So yeah, I mean, it's it's a positive thing for Formula One, and it's a statement of intent for Cadillac. Zach Brown actually talked up the benefit for Formula One of having Formula One represented in the Super Bowl. It was an advert in the fourth quarter, so it wasn't in the halftime show. It was later on, just after the Patriots had scored, I think. So it was an interesting part of the game. They played on the whole moon landing thing. They had the 1962 Kennedy speech, the "We choose to go to the moon" speech, which I'm sure everybody is familiar with, and I quite like that because it kind of ties in with one of the things that Graham Loudon's talked about, as he's got a bit of an interest in the Apollo missions and things like that, and he talks about the mission control approach for their multiple campus things. So I quite like the way it connected, and of course we got to see the livery, which is kind of monochromatic, but it's got a dash of the old 99 BAR with different sides of the car, hasn't it?
Yeah, I actually think if you shook up the 99 BAR with one of the late 90s West McLarens into a car, or put it into some AI agent and said, mix me this BAR livery and the West McLarens, you'd pretty much come out with what the Cadillac just looks like, a kind of a version of that West McLaren from like the late 90s, just with the silver and the black and the way it's all been molded. But it's always hard to tell though from plain images how cars look, because they can look very different in the real world. Often happens with the Ferrari, for example. The Ferrari often looks completely different when you see it in the flesh compared to how it is on images. So I'd be intrigued to see this week how that car looks in the real flesh, and not through some binoculars as well.
Yeah, I must admit, my first reaction when I saw it was, that's a little bit bland, but I will have to reserve judgment. And interestingly, Dan Towers, who's the CEO of TWG, which basically it runs the team, so that is Cadillac Formula One team, effectively talked about the reason it was monochrome is because that's what they do for the Cadillac performance models. So even though it's not the kind of normal Cadillac colours, it is their performance stuff. So their V series cars and that kind of thing tend to go with that. So yeah, we'll see how it is. I'm a little bit worried it'll be one of those cars that just kind of murks into being a little bit bland. So one of the things I'll do is watch from the left-hander at the end of the middle straight in Bahrain, and you often get the thing of, is that an Aston Martin or is that a Mercedes down the end of the straight working its way up from the previous corner? So I'll see how distinctive it is. But certainly, good to see Cadillac trying to make an appearance. It's quite interesting actually, because Dan Harris, when he was doing his media session earlier, was talking about how Cadillac wants to do things a little bit differently and bring the fans into it. I must confess, Cadillac in the past few months, they've actually been a bit quiet, haven't they? They keep talking about telling the story of building up the team, but I've been a little bit disappointed actually by how little of that's really been done.
But I think maybe a symptom of a very short winter, that I think people have been a bit shocked by how short the winter was, because the F1 season finished. There's a bit of the kind of the fallout from the championship being decided. Then the engine row flared up. Then it was Christmas, and everyone absolutely completely shut down. And then everyone's basically came back and has been flat out getting things ready. So I think that one of the differences this winter is there's been no time for proper reflection or bit of downtime to just explain things and talk through things. So I think that they probably had big plans to do all this, but you're building up a Formula One team from scratch, and you've got to get everything ready for the January the 26th to get out there in Barcelona. Probably chatting about what you're up to isn't a priority.
Yeah, that's fair. And we cannot underestimate the scale of the challenge. I've had a few people asking me, why are you constantly talking about the 107% qualifying thing, which on pace, they kind of look like they're fine on. I'm a little bit more concerned about reliability, but it takes so much to build up one of these teams. They are vast enterprises now, and they've got years of knowledge and designs and just things that exist. And Cadillac have had to build it all from scratch. It's a huge undertaking. I really like the fact they're in Formula One, and I think long term, I'm fascinated to see how they do. But yeah, being realistic about it at the moment, this is very much a foundation. Yeah, one thing that Towers did say is that they're actually a bit ahead of schedule on the power unit, the GM power unit that will be branded Cadillac, that's being worked on in the US. They say that is slated to be in the car still for 2029, and even if they've got to spend a load of money on a new design for 2031. They still think it's really important to get their own power unit on the grid. So they've reiterated that objective, but we'll get a feel for them in Bahrain. So I feel like now we're through the launch phase of the season, this weird launch phase, and it's kind of back to normal in a couple of days in Bahrain. As I say, we will be there. We'll be doing daily podcasts from the test, telling you what we've seen, heard, what we've learned in the paddock, loads and loads and loads of sources of information, and hopefully won't be any reason to go up a mountain to see what's going on. So stay with us for everything you need to know from F1 testing.